So hi all. So today we are going to discuss the second topic of our chapter, the force and laws of motion. So the second topic is the first law of motion. So which is coined by the Galileo, which is taken by the Newton as a law. So before going to the first law of motion, we have to understand something about the force. So first of all, we can look what are the effects of force, what the force can do. So that is the point that we are making clear before going to our first law of motion. So the force can change something. So if you are looking one situation, like if I am applying a force on a table, so before applying that force it was at rest, and after applying that it started moving. So what is the change there? So the force can change the speed. So before applying the force the speed was 0, and after applying that force there will be a speed. So the force can change the speed. That was the first effect by the force. Then the second effect, imagine that a body is moving in a straight line, and if I am applying some force from one side, so these objects will turn into another direction, right? So the force can change the direction. So the second effect is the force can change the direction. Then the third effect, imagine that I am applying a force on any object which is at rest or somewhere, applying a force on a mud. So it will not move, or it will not change the speed or direction, but change the shape. It will change the shape. So the third effect of the force is the force can change the shape of the object. So these are the effects of the forces. So now we can move to our first law of motion. So the first law of motion we can define like this. An object remains in a state of rest of uniform motion in a straight line unless compelled to change that state by an applied force. This is the definition of the first law. Okay. So how we can explain that one? So for example, if a body is at rest, so it will continue there until we are giving one external force. Okay. Or another one, if a body is at uniform motion, or if it is moving in a same speed, in a same direction, in one straight line, then it will continue like that until it acts upon an external force. So that is what the first law of motion is telling. In other words, we can say that if there is no force, there will be no any kind of effects that we have told earlier. That means there will be no change in speed, there will be no change in direction or shape. So that is the first law of motion. So connected to the first law of motion, there is a term you have to familiar with, that is inertia. Inertia is the laziness of the object to change the state of motion. So for example, if I am giving one force on that object, then that object will not respond immediately to that force. So this kind of laziness to change the motion, to change the state of motion, so that is called inertia. We can give one example. So for example, if you are sitting on a bus and suddenly the bus started moving, so your tendency or your body's tendency will be to go backward, right? Because your body have a laziness, or every object have the laziness to stay in the state of motion before and after. So that tendency leads to the inertia. So this inertia have a property, that is they are dependent on the mass. If the mass is heavier, or if the mass is higher, the inertia will be higher. That's why it is we require more force to move a heavier object, because it have more mass and the inertia will be higher. So today we have discussed the topics like the effects of forces, then the first law of motion and the inertia. So you have to understand the connection between the inertia and mass also. So that is all for today. Thank you.